and welcome to your award-winning The Reasons I'm Broke podcast, bringing you the reasons we're broke every single week, ranging from comics, movies, TV, video games, and more. I am Collector Daniel, and this week we are doing a creator spotlight, and I want to do as many of these as we can, especially given the state of the comic book industry right now. So far, I'm lucky enough where the shop still hasn't closed. There hasn't been a state mandated close either, or even a county one. But I wanted to give as many comic creators that actually wanted to get the word out on their books, on upcoming books, and really help out with getting that title and that promotion for these writers and artists who right now cannot make it to conventions anymore because of all of the various cancellations. That's a huge amount of income for many creators out there. So the first of our creator spotlight this week is the return. He was on back in 2018. He is back on right now, many issues later. Bernie Gonzalez, who's joining us today, currently in season 2 of City of Ghosts. Welcome back to the show, Bernie.
Thanks for having me, Daniel. It's kind of nice to be the first person on. No pressure.
No, not at all. And yeah, we're going to be releasing these kind of throughout the week based on whoever wants to come on. But right now, you as a creator, did you have any conventions already canceled? Any plans that you had to get Midnight Mystery out there?
I had 2 conventions, fortunately, just before all of this corona crisis began, and I was able to attend those without any issues. I do have a convention coming up in May in the Chicagoland area that I would imagine, while it may run, I think we're all going to be in that very interesting, awkward place where people might have to decide for themselves, okay, I can go back to work, I can go back grocery shopping. Am I comfortable going into a theater? Am I comfortable going into a Comic-Con? So while I'm hoping that convention will still happen, I'm still kind of bracing that it may not have the attendance that the show has had for previous years where, you know, to be fair, I've been able to meet fans, but also make some money from the show to help fund the comic book that I make. So we'll see what happens, but not at present, nothing that was canceled. A lot of shows were, for sure.
And have you taken some of this time yet to kind of preemptively plan out some extra appearances? Well, obviously conventions right now aren't taking guests, I'm assuming, because of the uncertain nature of all this, but kind of reaching out to maybe comic book stores or other online platforms, other online shows, just to kind of keep the ball rolling and keep comic books at the forefront of readers' minds.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if this is an opportunity now where if you are a creator, and you can just see it all over social media, comic shops are hurting. Comic shops are at a place where if they're in a state where they've been mandated to kind of like do a shelter at home, stay at home, it's impacted their business. I think there was a running tally I saw earlier today, today's Monday, and they were saying 35% of comic shops, just based on the states that do have stay-at-home orders, like in my state of Illinois, California, I want to say New Jersey as well, but 35% of comic shops are now ostensibly closed. So outside of mail order service and maybe some curbside delivery that you might see here and there, if they're kind of equipped for that, if they're staffed for that, it's an opportunity now where creators who, especially if they're utilizing comic shops to sell their comics, they have to maintain those relationships. So I've reached out to a few comic shops in my area just to let them know that I'm available. It feels strange because at the same time, like, I don't necessarily know. I feel a little helpless. I'm not sure how I can help them outside of retweeting, letting other folks know who are either current shoppers at the stores or who are interested in shopping at the store, to let other folks know, yes, they'll do mail service. Yes, they'll do curbside, or check their online store and they can help you out still as a fan, as a reader. But to say, hey, if you guys are around when everything is kind of said and done, I'll happily do a signing and contribute whatever I can to help towards the store, or give a certain portion of any signings or any prints or anything towards that. This is where, at best, that's kind of how I feel. It feels a little weird. It feels a little helpless.
I can definitely see how you can you want to help, but there's really so little ways right now to support shops and to really get more books into these stores. And unfortunately, everyone's heard the news now that this last batch of new comic book day releases are going to be the final ones, at least for the next month. So right now, retailers are going to be relying on reorders, on back issues. If they're fortunate enough to have back issues, it's going to be cutting down on hours completely if they're fortunate enough to even be open. And then the curbside delivery, yes, for the books that haven't yet been picked up to this point, any subscriptions that are, a couple of weeks old, but there's no new product coming in. And one fortunate thing that you have going for you, especially with Alterna, and Alterna Comics is amazing with retailers. You see on the YouTube channel all the time, and even on Twitter, Peter Sameti's always interacting with retailers. One of the publishers out there that is actually listening to comic retailers, and a lot of independent ones are. They've stepped up. Independent publishers have stepped up for the industry because they know how imperative each of these days are right now. And it's not a surprise to see that the big two did very little or are kind of not moving their feet quite as quickly as independent publishers, because that tells you who has the passion behind this medium. I don't think you and I are in these fields for the money at all, but we're doing this for the love of the comic book. And with your book out there available online, you have that advantage also of being able to directly reach out to readers. And how has this all shifted as you're trying to do the retailer helping, but also in pushing the online sales too?
Well, I've been kind of holding off a bit on going too far on having folks buy from my online shop. I know Peter has been, like you mentioned, he's been a leader in getting the word out there to retailers about the Alterna buyback program, where if you're not familiar with Alterna, the whole idea, the core philosophy is in bringing back newsprint. And my series was fortunate enough to be picked up through Alterna, and it's called Midnight Mystery. It prints on newsprint, which not only gives it that nostalgic, smells like comics you might have bought in the 80s into the early 90s, but at the same time, it affords a lower price point. So whereas a regular comic from the big two, glossy paper, might sell for $3.99 or $4.99, my comic book sells for $1.50, along with a lot of the other Alterna books. And I believe now the entire line is on newsprint. Makes it affordable, makes it easier as an entry point for a fan who's maybe not comfortable with the title. It's not Batman. It's not Spider-Man. They're all independent books. And for the most part, I think all the Alterna titles that I can think of do not have superheroes. Dark fantasy, humor, kid-friendly humor, mine, which is more supernatural noir in the style of Batman the Animated Series. So there are no capes per se, but at $1.50, it makes it very easy to give them a shot, to take that risk, because it's a comic book for all intents and purposes, and it even feels like an old school comic, but makes it a little easier to do that. But when you think about, again, where everything is right now, it's going to be a very fragile industry, because you do have, like you mentioned, the big two that have not necessarily stepped up. And if anything, it's kind of shown that indie publishers, they are that much more dependent on retailers to get their product out there, while they may not necessarily represent a large percentage of what's on the shelves. At the same time, the representation that is out there for Dark Horse, Image, Vault, Alterna, obviously, Boom, Dynamite, the shelf space that comic retailers make for them, along with what they can sell, I'd imagine, in cons and online, that's what keeps these publishers alive. That's what keeps the independent spirit alive. So Marvel and DC, I love Batman, I love Spider-Man, just like anyone else. But at the same time, they don't necessarily need comic shops to coexist between the box office and movies, wrapping paper, toys. They have enough merchandise. They have enough stuff out there beyond the comic books that will make shareholders happy. Because to be fair, it's corporate comics. That's what they're doing. They're trying to maintain these brands. Batman is the brand. Superman is the brand. For my book, Midnight Mystery is a passion. I have to make it. It's my story, a story I want to tell. To be able to work with Peter and Alterna makes it fortunate, because I have a publisher who cares, who also has a passion for the industry. but it makes it that much tougher right now to work with comic shops who, like you mentioned, not having new product coming in. I mean, you think about what a healthy comic shop was, and Daniel, you work at a shop, so this will be kind of interesting. If you have a really diverse comic shop, a shop that has back issues, that has a pull box, that has pull list rather, that has Funko Pop figures, action figures, especially after the closing of Toys R Us, so that they have this place that facilitates a wide spectrum of fans to be there. Action figures, statue collectors, back issue collectors, current folks, and maybe even gaming. You think as diverse as a store as you can be, if you're not allowed to have anyone in the store, or if people just feel a little apprehensive about being there, then it doesn't matter how many Funko figures you have or how many exclusives you might carry, how many variant covers you have. If no one's in the shop, no one can buy them from you. And it's going to be really interesting to see how the numbers that unfortunately have been scaling down, at least since I started Midnight Mystery in 2018. I want to say there were 24, maybe 2,500 comic shops. And if you did, some sort of weird analysis and figure out what did that actually mean, a shop that maybe has a few comics but is primarily D&D, Warhammer, are they a comic shop? They might call themselves a comic shop, to be fair, fine, but they might not carry independent books. So as far as I'm concerned, I would never get my comic in there. And it makes sense. Maybe for them as a retailer, it just doesn't work. And if Warhammer and selling statuettes and stuff makes sense for them, great, because it keeps them open. Now, as diverse as that shop may be, if no one's coming in, it's going to be really tough. So it's really going to be about that fan-to-fan experience. And from the retailer standpoint, trying to work with your real fan base, the folks that have been kind of keeping your doors open to either buy what you have in stock or at least, see what you can work with them to keep the doors open for a while.
Yeah, one of the letters that went through to retailers was about trying to get creative on what you can do in your store, which is obviously easier said than done, because I think I speak for a lot of retailers in which we're constantly looking for ways to innovate and get information out to our customers and our subscribers and our regulars as much as possible, because the more they're in the know, I think the better it is for everyone, because they'll be up on the latest solicitations, the latest comic books. The previews catalog I push like crazy. There's a couple of different stores that a couple of owners have in our it's not exactly a chain, but in our independent shops that all share the same name. And I have one of the highest numbers of previews catalogs, because that thing is imperative and important to any of the independent readers out there, because as you mentioned, there's only so much shelf space out there, and some readers will only see what's in store. But if they see that catalog, if they get that catalog, they're like, hey, I didn't know this kind of stuff was releasing. That's $1.50. And I have many readers that do buy and subscribe to Alterna books because of that price point, and that's a huge thing for them. Then they get to hold it, and they see that it's newsprint. And with your comic itself, Midnight Mystery, it lends itself even more to your artwork, into the story you're telling. It's almost like a perfect fit to newsprint, because as you mentioned, it does have those notes of Batman the Animated Series. It's got some notes of Darwin Cook, which is one of my favorite artists of all time. And that when you have the physical book and you're reading it and it's right in front of you, it really helps you dive into that experience and get you into Zeke's story as you continue each of these different seasons. And I really gotta hand it to Alterna and to you for choosing that platform, choosing newsprint as a way to tell your story.
Oh no, I appreciate it. That was one of the big attractions to Alterna, and when Peter's Bring Back Newsprint initiative, the books that he was doing were so interesting. But I think working in a comic shop setting, we all kind of see, if you're a comic shop fan, collector, employee, it's a very niche industry. So when I was, I work in marketing in my day job, and I was starting to ask friends and family members who are not comic book collectors, they're not comic book readers, and who were at the same time incredibly, kind to want to support what I was doing. They wanted to know where to buy the book, how they could order it. So like you were saying, the previews catalog, great. That's where we know to start. That's where other collectors and readers know to start. Average person doesn't know what it is. Average person doesn't even know that when we compare it to a phone book, because maybe the average reader doesn't know what a phone book was compared to what we have now. There's definitely a difference in our way of kind of what we know to be the industry. And it's I think a microcosm. What I've done through Midnight Mystery in the last 2 years, what Alterna has been able to do in trying to get as many fans and as many readers as possible because of the low price point, because of good customer service. I mean, those are the things that hopefully have given us a fighting chance. But I think now all of that put together, it's going to be, in a way, Darwinism at its finest. We're going to see those shops that have been able to, beyond being a comic shop, this is just being able to run a good small business, and making sure that there's money in the coffers to be able to sustain themselves for a little longer, being able to pivot very quickly. I mean, as a comic shop employee owner, you were already on ice skates to begin with. And I think this is going to be interesting because you had to move. If you saw that your audience was starting to buy Funko Pops, then you had to move that way. If they were into magic, then now you're a magic shop. And whatever it is, if it's Toys R Us closing, now you're carrying Transformers. And if people are bringing you old Transformers and you can sell them and make some money off of it, then now you're buying old Transformers and G.I. Joe toys. You have to just become whatever you have to become to survive. And I think that's a case where even as creators now, we've always kind of, I don't know, I think there's a way where we've kind of fetishized that idea of being in previews, of being in a comic shop. If since 2018, there's maybe 2,500 shops when I began, I want to say at the beginning of maybe late last year, 2019, early 2020, maybe we're at around like 1,800 to 2,000 shops. I can only imagine that there's going to be another kind of like wave of shops that will close over the next few months. And then that's what we're going to have. We're going to be a much more of a niche industry. And as creators, either you have to work with your existing fan base, you have to cultivate one, because that's what comic shop owners are going to start doing too. If your book does not sell as many copies as the lowest selling Marvel book, I would have to make that choice as well and say, I don't know that I would want Midnight Mystery on the shelf. I can carry, some ancillary Gotham Batman title and maybe sell 4 or 5 copies of that. And it would make sense. I would not begrudge that comic shop owner. So I'm like, yeah, you have to pay the rent. That's what you have to do right now.
Fortunately, right now, it looks like that decision has kind of been taken away from us in a way, because now there's no more FOC, no more final order cutoffs. It is all strictly reorders. So that all kind of went out the window. And when this all blows over and whatever comic shops are still standing at the end of this are going to hopefully go back to business of, all right, let's do a grand reopening or some kind of celebration, something to kind of celebrate the fact that the store made it through and you can come back in and you can place your orders, and the previews catalogs will be around, of course. And I'm sure there's going to be hopefully a wave of creators that are going to be doing even more signings locally to kind of help foster that comic shop for a lot of people. But as you mentioned, in that meantime, you got to find many different ways to get your book out there. And right now, you've had mysterycomic.com up for several years, and currently you do have, at least I checked yesterday, and it looked like every issue was still in stock, or at least you still had copies. And I remember Diamond Distributors was out of print on some of those earlier issues as well. Our readers, if they want to check out Midnight Mystery Season 1 or Season 2, are they still able to get all of the issues through mysterycomic.com?
Yes. So I've had a few orders in the last week. Fans have been kind enough to put some orders in for the whole series. And like you mentioned, Season 1 sold out. Alterna did go to second printing. Same with issue 2. Issue 3 is pretty hard to get. I did that one as a sideways issue. So if you think about your regular comic book and how you open it normally, I did it more as like a calendar orientation, just to kind of throw something a little different into the formatting. And as an independent creator, you have to do that. You have to make your comic look different, feel different. If it's just as simple as turning the book on its side and having someone say, hey, I remember this. This reminds me of that X-Force comic or that Spider-Man comic that Todd McFarlane did in the 90s that was sideways. Great, perfect. I'd love to be in a conversation with Todd McFarlane any day of the week. So that's perfectly fine. But that's what you have to do. So fortunately, I've had a few orders online for folks that have been trying to pick up the book, taking advantage of, again, same situation that a lot of folks are in. I'm in, working from home, making myself available. You guys were kind enough to have me on the show and engaging with fans and letting them know I'm still creating. I always intend to make comics, whether they're for free or for not, or I charge for them. I have to do something because it's just, it's my muse. That's what I have to do, and continue to engage with fans in that way. Because again, they're working from home too, or they're in a situation where they're not sure what's going to happen, but they know finances are going to be tight. Things are just the landscape is just going to look a little different. They want to go back to that comic shop. And as a creator, if I can give them a reason to pick up my book when they go there, again, that much more reason that hopefully I can get a sale for that comic shop. So like you said, I do hope a lot of retailers do that kind of grand reopening, free comic book day. Again, I think it's been moved till May. So it'll be an interesting, event now more than ever to make sure that we can get as many people in comic shops as possible, because for the folks that have grown up going to a comic shop, such an amazing experience to be able to surround yourself with, all of these new books, old books, action figures, and everything else. I don't want to lose that experience. So buying the gift cards from a local comic shop, that's an option. Checking out their online store, supporting them, doing those things that will help them out. And then when this is all said and done, just realizing comics will be here in some form or another, and whatever it is, we got to support it.
I've definitely seen that mentality with a lot of the regulars, and very grateful that those relationships have been fostered throughout the months and years, and that kind of the whole comic industry has championed this idea of whatever local business, whether it's a comic shop or something else, buying a gift card just to get some cash flow into the store to help with this economic impact. That is for sure. At the time, we were like, it's going to happen. And then of course it did. The other shoe fell, or the other shoe dropped. And now people are going out, and I've seen that. I sold several gift cards today, and it's just the amount of gratitude to not only be able to sell those gift cards and be open, but to have those subscribers that do care enough about the store, that do want to continue going to our little shop just to see us, through the end of this. And I think that's a huge thing. And that's not something that you really see in a lot of businesses. But fortunately, for as you mentioned, for you as well, there's a lot of readers coming out and supporting Midnight Mystery and trying to catch up on these 2 volumes, especially, which you have that broken down into 4 issues for each of these seasons. And then for season 2, which I believe just wrapped up with City of Ghosts on issue 4, those are all broken down into seasons. You can pick up each of these 4 issues. I will tell you straight up, my favorite issue so far out of these 8 has been number 3, The Burning Bride.
Okay.
And that one, it was such a good standalone story. And the way, to any Brokettes that haven't yet picked this up from even the last interview or in between, is this particular comic, number 3, does have like its own standalone story. And some of these books I've seen do have that, where you can read it from beginning to end, and the kind of this particular mystery for Zeke wraps up. But then there's an overarching story that continues into issue 4, for example, in season 1. But then the end of season or issue 4, it leads into what you eventually get in season 2. So it's kind of nice that each one is digestible on its own, but it's also giving you a bigger story that connects to not only the previous issue, but even the previous season with City of Ghosts.
Awesome. So I'm interested to hear, what did you think of City of Ghosts season 2?
That one went even deeper into a lot of the background of the villain that was introduced in the first season. And I feel like we're getting, I know it's not as reader friendly to say, but I think you're kind of doing yourself a disservice if you're not reading the season 1 line, and if you're just jumping into season 2, because there is a lot in there that feeds into what's happening in City of Ghosts. So I will say that it's not as standalone as the first season, but it's for a reason. As I mentioned, it's continuing this overarching story so far that we get. And with Zeke, it seems like he's even, starting to break down even more than what we saw. He was more uncertain in season 1, but now there's even more happening to really change his day-to-day operations, change his detective work. And how many? I think you had mentioned there was 3 or 4 seasons total that you had planned during the first interview. Is that still the case moving forward?
Yes. So the third one is tentatively scheduled to come out in later 2020, and that season will be called Midnight Mystery: Gods and Monsters. And if you read issue 4 of season 2, issue 404 from City of Ghosts, that was season 2, the last panel, the last word, should kind of give you an idea on where everything is going. It's definitely starting to bubble up, and I think kind of what you mentioned was a surprise to me, because when I started doing Midnight Mystery in season 1, I thought I'll just continue doing these monster of the week type stories, kind of stuff that I've always loved from Supernatural and X-Files. And if you're older like me, you might remember Kolchak the Night Stalker. And if not, just YouTube it. It's really cheesy. It's from the 70s, but it is about a Chicago reporter who happens to kind of like fall into these supernatural mysteries, even though he doesn't necessarily go out looking for them. And the Darren McGavin, who played the reporter, he was the father from A Christmas Story. So he had that very kind of like rough around the edges feel. But I found that show in college, and very much in reruns, and thought, this is neat. I've never seen anything like this. Then to find that Chris Carter, who created X-Files, Millennium, The Lone Gunman, he was inspired by Kolchak the Night Stalker as well. The tone, the way Kolchak related to the supernatural, it was a very everyman blue collar relationship where he wasn't necessarily a believer like Mulder, but if he was going into an abandoned warehouse, then if there was a ghost there, he would do the same thing you or I would do. He would freak out, but maybe, since it's not his first time around, he might freak out a little less and to try to figure out maybe what he could do. So when I started season 1 in Midnight Mystery, that was my approach. Take a private detective who I can put in a lot of different situations. He could be doing surveillance for a business. He could be looking after a lost child and trying to recover them. He could do all these different things. And then in a back alley somewhere, maybe there's a vampire or a zombie or something. And maybe the kidnappers weren't, trying to get money from like some corporate head, but instead there were a bunch of zombies who just wanted the kid, something like that, just to always have that little supernatural bent to it. And it worked. I thought fans were really going for it, but then I kind of realized that I really wanted to tell Zeke's story that much more. And I think you definitely saw how I was leaning into that story in season 2, and at the same time kind of mirroring the villain. And I say that in air quotes on a podcast, but the villain in Count Karloff, who has kind of like a back role in the epilogues in the first season. Mm-hmm. And then he starts coming more into the foreground, and you kind of seeing how he's a foil to King and how their journeys are reflecting each other. But I'm glad you've picked up on it, because in season 1, Zeke was kind of beat up a little bit. Season 2, he started with a beard, and I just wanted to show how physically he was changing and how all this stuff was affecting him. If you saw ghosts and zombies and vampires, I think it would mess with you too. It would get to you a little bit. So I think by the time we get to season 3, and maybe even season 4, depending on how it goes, but season 3 for sure, if you see the end of the last 2 issues, 3 and 4 of City of Ghosts, you see how physically it's affected him, because for sure it's affected him mentally.
I do enjoy how you really take the time in setting up the panels in the comic books where there's several establishing shots, but that's there to also give you a bit of a reflection on what Zeke is feeling. And it's not, a panel with 18 word bubbles. You really take your time to establish and let the artwork speak for itself, which I think more comic books, personally, I think more should do. Let some of the artwork tell the story and not rely on a bunch of dialogue that is there to, okay, and this is where we're going to get, all right, now we're there. And, I really do appreciate that with Midnight Mystery.
I try to create these rules that I follow. One of the first ones, since we're both fans of Darwin Cook, and I'm sure a ton of listeners are as well, in New Frontier, he had that 3-panel structure. And the first time I saw it, in my mind as an artist, as a comic book artist, I thought, this is so limiting. There's not really a big splash page and splashy panels with really dynamic panel layouts. And by the time you're done reading New Frontier or a lot of his other work that has a similar kind of structure, you realize that everything is just so clean and concise, that the storytelling was so on point that by the time you're done, you appreciate what he did, his artwork, how he was able to do it. But then you just marveled, at least again, I was looking at this and saying, wow, he did this all like with 95% 3-panel pages. And then you start breaking it down and kind of doing this kind of like, I don't know, weird analysis. And I'm like, that means he had to figure out on each panel, also as a writer, since he was writing New Frontier, where would the camera sit that would give you the best coverage? So if you have 2 or 3 people in a shot, where do I put it so I can set up the scene, set up the people, do it in an interesting way, and at the same time, keep telling the story and not making things confusing. And I think maybe in my 3rd or 4th time through the New Frontier, where I was looking at it more, again, kind of like dissecting it instead of just reading it like the first time. But when you're dissecting, you realize, man, he just made all these great decisions over and over and over again. Yeah, I'm not going to mess with genius. I'm just going to go ahead and copy that. So Midnight Mystery is, again, for the most part, maybe like 95% 3-panel pages. In the 2nd season, I started adding a few splash pages just for effect, because I thought this kind of works because I don't do it a lot. And then I hope it adds that little bit of magic where, as a reader, if the page turn is set up perfectly, you're like, oh, wow, I've been forced to kind of live in this 3-panel structure, and then boom, this big thing happens. It must be important. But then it's my job as the creator, as the writer, to put that across. But I'm glad that you enjoy the pacing, because that's something that's really important to me, to make it feel very fluid. One of the other rules I stick by is no inner monologue. If the character has to say something or get the audience caught up, if I can't do it visually, and if I have to, do that scene where the police officer comes in and says, hey, Zeke, did you hear about that killer? I heard it on the reports last night. It's like, I could do it that way if I need to. I could also just show shots of Detective King, going to a newspaper stand, looking at the headlines and communicating it all without even showing it, without even saying it. And maybe in the face of the newsstand worker who's looking around, they're kind of afraid because they're like, oh, all these killings have happened. Here you go, mister. Here's your paper. It's like you can do so much in those facial expressions and the eyes. Like, if I can do that, great. If not, good thing is I have a great ally in Wes Loker, who's the letterer, and he's just been gangbusters in helping me get the word balloons out there, because that's the one thing that I'm not comfortable doing with. I can write it, I can draw it, I can color it, design work, but word balloons, not my thing.
And one of the additions to the magic that you have to the book is the in-world ads that show up throughout the comic book, which is an extra bit of effort on your part. And I've even been seeing on your Instagram some creative ways to get the characters and the world out there and really flesh it out into the physical world. Were those pogs that were pictured on Instagram there, and some of the other neat things that you've been doing in your shop?
That's right. That's the best thing about doing independent comics. You don't have to go to a room of shareholders and say, hey guys, do you think we should have Batman pogs? And then everyone should look at you being like, really? Is that what we're doing? We're doing pogs now for the Dark Knight? No, that's for Midnight Mystery. I thought, you know what? It kind of works. It's a little bit of a throwback piece of merchandising. And I found a great company out west that was able to do kind of like a one sheet, so that you could have 6 different pogs all on the sheet. Features Detective King, Count Karloff, a new character that's going to be revealed in the new Giant that hopefully should come out in summer, that collects issues 1, 2, and 3. Or no, I'm sorry, rather in the 2nd volume, which collects issue 4. And there's a new double-sized story that I'm doing, never before seen, that's kind of like this boogeyman banshee type character. But yeah, it was just neat to kind of, once the pogs got to my house, I cracked them open, and I don't know, I kind of laughed for a little bit and thought, all right, this is kind of neat. I remember having these in grammar school, and people would trade them, and you'd have all these different characters from whatever cartoon or or whatever was popular at the time. But I thought, you know what, this is kind of neat. Maybe people will like it. So hopefully when you saw them, you got a kick out of it too.
Yeah, they were really, really cool. I always like seeing the innovative ways that you get these characters out there. And I just took a peek into Diamond, and I was going to suggest, if there's a way to help out comic stores to order, if you're at all interested in Midnight Mystery, you can order it straight through your comic shop, but it looks like a lot of it is sold out through Diamond. So right now it looks like all four, or both seasons, each one has 4 issues, are up on mysterycomic.com, which those purchases, do they go directly to you, Bernie?
They do, yeah. And if you're not comfortable, and there's a full professional checkout system there, debit, credit, PayPal, Square, it's all set up through there. But if you want to support any of the other Alterna books, and there's a lot of good ones out there, you can also go to Alterna Access and then alternaaccess.com, and all the books will be there as well. So Mystery Comic, my website, you can see the shop, you can see trailers for the different issues, and that way you can see what the book's about and the tone. And if it looks interesting, give them a shot. Again, they're pretty inexpensive, or Alterna Access, and they'll be available out there for you. So, and even issue 4 of the first season, I hired a ton of professional voice actors to actually act out the issue. And as you kind of flip through, I don't know if you remember this, Daniel, there were these Spider-Man, well, a lot of Marvel ones, including a Spider-Man one, where you would flip through them kind of like in the mid 80s, and they would just like, you would put on the record and they would give you a little beep to turn the page. Mm-hmm. So I saw a ton of those on YouTube, and I vaguely remember those as a kid. And I thought, oh, this is so neat. So for issue 4 of Midnight Mystery Season 1, the story involves, this really won't ruin too much, because if you see the cover, you see that there's a zombie soldier who's holding on to a letter. So the basis of the story is that there are a group of undead soldiers who, in the way that they died during the World War II, their last letters were never delivered to their loved ones. So they haven't been able to rest in peace. Their last messages were not sent. Detective King is involved in the middle of this case where, as a veteran himself, it's really taking a toll on him emotionally and physically, as these soldiers are essentially haunting him. So while he's not doing a case, he is the case, and he has to figure out how he can bring some resolution to them, and then also to himself, because then he starts being haunted by some of his past memories and things that he was involved in. But again, as an independent creator, I thought this is kind of neat. The whole story is told in letters, so there's no word balloons in it at all. The whole story, even the epilogue, is told in letters that are back and forth. So you only see what's happening from the expressions, the people, and what's happening in the panels, but no one is interacting with each other in dialogue. And I thought, oh, this would be kind of neat to get folks with a better voice than mine, to professional voices, to actually read these letters. And after I got those folks to record them, thought, okay, well, there's a big dogfight, 2 airplanes fighting each other. I'm like, well, of course I have to add the airplane sounds in the background and the bullets whizzing and the planes flying by to give it the full effect. Then after that, I'm like, oh, all that's missing is music. All right, well, let me just go find some music now and lay that track down and try to find different kind of, melancholy, just really good cinematic music that made sense with the tone of the book. Again, don't have to ask permission. Well, that's not true. I did have to ask my wife, as she's like, wait, what's this on our credit card charge? Who are these people? But yeah, I think, if folks like the sound of that and being able to do that, those are the risks that I was able to take through Midnight Mystery. Pogs and professional voice actors.
Can't beat that, right?
That's
really cool. No one else is doing that.
My wife would probably say, why not just hire me to do all the voices? But
And I will have links to everywhere you can find Midnight Mystery, mysterycomic.com, and then Alterna's website as well. But on mysterycomic.com, there's a tab. It'll show videos, and you can click on there, and you'll have the trailers on there, including the issue 4 that Bernie was just describing. I personally suggest getting these through in physical form if you can, because to me, I've always been about carrying a comic and flipping through the pages. I've tried digital, and it's just not for me, but I know for some some people, they can do that. And this is available digitally as well, whatever you prefer. But I will personally recommend getting these through that newsprint for that extra added experience straight through Alterna or mysterycomic.com.
And you can do the two things that you can only do with a physical newsprint book. One, you can smell it because it just has that unique smell that newsprint paper has. And two, you can get Play-Doh or silly putty rather, and put it on the panel, and you can actually get it to make an impression on the silly putty. So if you've never done that with a book, you can actually do that with my book. And I actually encourage you to do that. I'm actually asking you to do it. It'd be kind of cool.
It's true. Very true. And also with a lot of this comics and quarantine thing happening throughout the nation, some people's internet is getting throttled or even shut down completely. But the tried and true physical books will always be there for you. So I will say that's what I recommend, or download them ahead of time if you prefer to read them digitally that way too. Bernie, anything else you want to give to the Brokehead Core or tell the Brokehead Core on the Midnight Mystery, or as far as where they can find you? Again, there will be links in today's show notes, but in case they're driving and they want to remember where they can follow you.
Absolutely. So I'll do three things here. If you like the sound of Midnight Mystery, supernatural noir pulp, very much in the style of Batman the Animated Series. Daniel was very kind to say that it kind of reminds him of Darwin Cook. But again, I think Daniel and I are both Darwin Cook fans. I wear my inspiration on my sleeve. Bruce Timm, Darwin Cook, Animated Series, very much is the aesthetic of Midnight Mystery. If you like it, check out @IWantMystery on any of the social media channels. So you can check out behind the scenes shots, videos. I post a lot of stuff out there, movies that I'm watching, and you can easily see how they kind of weave their way into the books, because you'll see that I'll start getting into a certain TV series or a certain movie, and all of a sudden it's very obvious that, oh, I'm reading a ton of Lovecraftian horror. Well, now Midnight Mystery has some Lovecraftian theme, so kind of need to kind of watch that process. mysterycomic.com or iwantmystery.com. Either one will get you to my website, trailers, shop, information about me, the books, all of that's there. With Comics in Quarantine going on right now, I'm kind of taking a different journey too. I've always been a practical artist. That means I use pen, paper, inks. I geek out about ink pens and different types of quills that are out there. And that's what I've been doing the majority of my life. And to say I'm in my early 40s, I mean, I've been doing this for 30 plus years. And now in 2020, with, the circumstances being what they are, working from home, changing up a little bit, I bought an iPad Pro, and I'm going to try to learn how to draw digitally and see if I can carve out some time from my process, the comics making process, and see if I can learn a few things that I was always kind of, I color digitally in Photoshop, and this gives me, I think, an extra opportunity to kind of see how folks are doing it. I'll still always do practical. I think that'll never get out of me, but there's just certain effects that are very difficult to do, and I'm definitely not nearly as good as 1% of Darwin Cook. So if I can cheat a little bit, use some digital effects and try that, I'm going to try. It lets me keep making comics, lets me keep learning, and considering that, kind of stuck at home right now, I figure this is a good opportunity to try it. But in doing so, I'm recording a diary of my process. So if you check out @IWantMystery, mysterycomic.com, @IWantMystery in social media, you'll see some of my videos. I'm doing like maybe 5 to 10 minute videos every other day, going through the process from why am I doing this, unboxing the merchandise that I got, the Apple Pencil, the paper-like surface on the iPad Pro, and walking through everyone, the same thing, downloading Procreate. I think that's what I'm going to start doing first thing tomorrow morning, and just go through what other folks well before me have done when they've moved into digital art. So if that's interesting to you as a comic book artist, because you've already done this or you're interested in it, check out the journey and see what you think.
This is as independent as it gets, Brokehead Core. Bernie, I want to take a moment to thank you for not only reaching out to be a part of this creator spotlight, but also for continuing to do what you love and keeping comics alive, keeping comics around, and creating another option for readers out there. It's not an easy time at all for, I think, most of our professions and most of what we do right now. And this kind of stuff is what I've heard already too from customers. This is the stuff that distracts us already from the real world. This is the stuff that enriches our lives. And, choosing comics as a passion is huge for a number of reasons. Comics are amazing, but it's also amazing therapy for a lot of people out there. So I do want to thank you for that as well, Bernie.
Oh, no problem. Thank you for letting me be on. I mean, the passion that you and Kelli have for the medium, obviously part of your livelihood as well. I mean, it's something that we all love. I mean, it's not just, something that I do on the side. It's my passion. I would have done this without Alterna picking up Midnight Mystery. I was already selling digital copies on my website before. If the entire industry were to completely collapse as we know it, which again, not being a doomsayer, I doubt it will, it'll come out in a different way. It'll have to. But I'll still keep making comics. And I think the best thing is I'll be reading comics because that's something that I enjoy. I love comics, and I'm just starting to get into comicsology and digital comics. Still prefer to have it in my hand. Still rather go to the comic shop, have that pull list every Wednesday, be a Wednesday warrior and pick them up. But, this is a time where things are changing. So I think I think it'll look a little different. But as creators, as podcasters, as fans, right now, this is more than ever a time where we have to just kind of give a little extra. So if it's retweeting an artist out there that you like, do that. If you're thinking about starting a comic, start it right now. If you're thinking about doing a podcast, reviewing comics, talking about comics, the comics making experience, don't let anyone stop you. Do it right now. Put it out there. If you have 1 or 2 listeners, something I heard very early on that was very inspiring. I did a podcast for a while and, just talked about like 80s movies and TV shows that I enjoyed. And sometimes I would only have 20 or 30 downloads for an episode. And I had a friend of mine who just gave me a very good piece of insight and said, if you were ever going to go into a room and there were 20 or 30 people inside there and they were going to listen to what you were going to talk about, again, cheesy 80s movie, TV show, comic book that I like, he's like, you'd be ecstatic, right? 20 or 30 people just to listen to you talk about something like that. Be amazing. He's like, just enjoy it, because that means there's 20 or 30 people who did the same thing. They just did it on their iPhone or on their computer. And right now, if you're able to create. That's not canceled. If you're able to consume, do it however you can. Just keep supporting comics. Comics are going to be here forever.
And that's about all that can be said. Very well put, Bernie. Thank you again for joining us on the Creator Spotlight today. Once again, follow Bernie. There's going to be links in the description of today's episode. And you see the comic on our new Comic Book Day pictures when it does release every couple of months or so. So definitely you'll see it on there. We always tag them on Instagram as well. So thank you again, Bernie, for joining me on today's episode.
Thanks, Daniel. Pass along Kelli. 0 for 2. Haven't had her on the podcast, so maybe the third time.
I'll pass that along for sure. Thank you, Brokehead Core, for tuning in as well. I've been Collector Daniel, and all will be well.